Hi and welcome to this video where I will be coloring a page from Abenteuer der Blütenelfen, translated to Adventures of the Blossom Fairies by Christl Vogl. Specifically this one here with the snowdrops. If you're new to this channel, hi, my name is Ina. If not, welcome back. I've already done the blossom border on the left hand side, because it's the same on all the left pages, and I only change the butterfly each time. But now we are focusing on this page. I'm using this giant gloss pack to keep the page a bit flatter. I've decided to use some old felt pens that I would like to use up, applying them like watercolors. They're not as juicy as they used to be. So I have prepared not just one yellow, but several shades of yellow to start with. I'll draw on this thick cover sheet foil and then apply it as a base layer with my water tank brush. Now I'm just coloring with yellow, and I can already see that not much is happening, which means I'll probably sort out one or two of these pens. I'm trying to get as much color onto the foil as possible. Sometimes it helps to wait a bit and the pens start working again. But as I said, they're all quite old, so I just give them a try. I'm now dropping 2 drops of water onto the color to dilute it. I just want to use this layer as a light base and add shading later with pencils. I assume this here is a blue tit, as Christl Vogl often features them in her books. I already had one in her winter book last month. Now I'll start coloring the sun. I don't use these old felt pens directly on the paper, because their color is too intense. And since they are so old, I wouldn't manage to color an entire motif with them anyway. Just the sun alone would be too much, I think. So this is a good way to still make use of the pens and use them up. Down here are winter aconites, and the other flowers are snowdrops. As you can see here, the girl has a blossom on her head, and this fairy's outfit is basically inspired by the flowers. That means the petals are here, and the dress, or rather the jumper and skirt, the hat and even the wings have the pattern from the inside of the blossom. You can also see that on the cover, though it's colored a bit more imaginatively. I would like to keep it realistic, but you can see it quite well here. This is based on the inside and the outside. And the trousers are based on the leaf. As I said, I want to keep it realistic, so I'm coloring it relatively white. Okay, do I need more yellow? I think she'll get slightly blonde hair, so I'm just adding a yellow base. And I think that's it for now. I continue now with light green. Here too, we can see that not much color is coming out. But if you add a drop of water, as shown earlier, you can still get quite a bit out of it, for coloring or basing. This one here works better. even though it's about the same age. Again, adding a bit of water. I also like to test the color on my scrap paper to see if it's too dark for my liking. Yes, the color is fine. And now I'll use it to color the green parts of the flowers. If you want, you can already start shading at this step, but I rarely do that. I'm mainly doing this to see where I want to place different colors. And having some color on the paper already somehow makes it easier to color the whole thing. Additionally, the colors of the colored pencils will pop more later. Of course, with a stronger base layer, this effect is even more pronounced. But for me, a bit of color is enough here. Another advantage is that if white were to show through with the colored pencils later, it wouldn't be plain white, but the lightest shade of the color I'm using. This makes coloring simpler and quicker. Now I'll do the inside of the blossom and also the leaves of the winter aconites in this green, as well as this grass here. Later I can definitely go over it with different shades of green. Anything more? No, I think that's enough for me. I'm now using a darker green, simply adding it to the lighter one. And now I'm looking for another dark green. I've got this thick one here that releases a bit more color. Adding a bit of water, and you can definitely mix it with a lighter green. Okay, let's test it. Now I'm coloring the fir branches in this darker green. If, like me, you don't shade directly, it's always best to use the highlight color for the base layer, because darkening is much easier than lightening. Especially in these books by Christl Vogl, which aren't very big, I really like using this technique. However, for larger books, I prefer using watercolor pencils to avoid the risk of these old pens not releasing enough color anymore. Good. Now I'm testing this pen that looks like it might be good for skin tones. But I think even if I dilute it, it's still way too pink. Yes. Can I use it somewhere else? Yeah, I just use it for her outfit here. And to make sure the color appears somewhere else on the page, I also use it for the stripes on the head and for the worm. Okay, to get a better skin tone, I'm using a new Better marker, a brush pen from Ecoline. I could probably color directly on the paper with it, but with a brush, I can apply it with fewer streaks. The color is actually quite dark, surprisingly. So I'm using a bit more water. Now it's too light, but even here, it's better to apply a second layer than to make the whole thing too dark. That was pink beige, and now I'm using just beige to create a slightly different skin tone. I've used brown for the pine cone and now I'm using red for the ladybird's wings and also for the head. The tongue of the sun will get a bit of red as well. Then I'll try using blue. This pen seems to work a bit better. I'll test all the pens on paper shortly, but I think there are already a few that I'll sort out soon, which is pretty good because that's the reason I'm doing this. I'm also using the blue for the snowy areas that are in the shadows. If you're wondering, is spacing necessary? No, definitely not. But as I said, the colors are a bit more vibrant later, and you quickly get an overview of which color is where. You can also see if you might need a bit more of any color somewhere. It's always good when a color appears multiple times in a picture, unless it's meant to stand out, in which case it can appear just once. So, where else can I use this blue? On the stripes of that hat. What kind of beetle is this? I think it'll be a bit bluish. I also forgot some snow shading here. I'd applied a bit of color behind the snow hills too. Okay, since I don't necessarily want to add another color, I'll make this skirt blue as well. And then I'll try to get a bit more yellow from the pen for the stripes of this hat. Now I'm taking some brown again for the hair. It always looks on the foil as if there's no color at all, but somehow there is some. So I think for the background I'll use soft pastels, which means I let everything dry first. Oh, but before that, I'll take a bit of yellow and go over these dotted areas of the sun. Okay, now I really let it dry properly. Although I just said I wanted to do the background with soft pastels, I've now thought that since I want to use up old supplies, I'll use these water-soluble crayons for kids from Harlots for the background. As I'm missing a few colors in this small set, I'm combining them with some Jackson crayons. Since I want to blend the colors a bit later, I'm also using them on my foil, but now on the rough side. I've already taped off the edges with washi tape. And now I'm start with the Jacksons. This one is olive deep. And now I'll add olive light. Is that enough already? No idea, I'll see. Here too, I'm using my water tank brush again. I'm using these two colors for the ground where the snow has already melted. I definitely noticed that I shouldn't go over the same spot too often. Otherwise, I would damage the paper. Good. I let this dry first. Then I see if I want to add a second layer, or if this is enough. You can't really see a clear difference between the two colors yet. So we'll see what I'll do about that. Now I want to create a gradient from salmon pink through orange yellow to this yellow here, and then blending it into a whitish shade, getting lighter toward the sun. I'll start by applying a bit with the wax pastels directly on the paper. I definitely want to mix the lighter yellow with the white later. And since these children's crayons don't blend well on paper, I prefer to do that directly on the palette. But I think with the Jacksons, I can start directly on the paper already. Oh, I forgot a blade of grass here. Well, it's not a big deal. It's just one. And it won't be noticeable later when I color it with colored pencils. Here I'm pulling the salmon pink a bit higher because this area is farther from the sun. And since I color the snowflake later with a gel pen, I can simply color over it now. Okay, now I'm using the yellow-orange up to the corner here and then down here in the small gaps. So I'll use the yellow here directly and then on the foil. It looks a bit dirty somehow, but it's not. By the way, the blue edge is only on the paper underneath. I'm mixing the yellow here on my improvised palette with the white to make it a bit lighter. Then I'll activate all the color from the crayons with my water tank brush. In the small areas here, I'm taking a bit of color directly from the crayon to fill in the small gaps. Maybe I should color this area between the branches with darker green instead. No, I let the background shine through there as well. I could apply the color here with much more opacity, but I actually quite like this delicate look. For the larger areas, I use a bigger brush. On one hand, it's quicker, and on the other, it's easier to color a large area evenly with a bigger brush. By the way, don't be surprised that the picture on the other side is already based. That's something I did in between while this page was drying. I want this side here to feel very warm because of the sun, so I'm using warmer colors, while the other side will be a bit cooler. That's why I've used different green and blue shades here. Now I'll try mixing the white and the yellow. I feel like it's still very yellow. Yes, I definitely need more white. This version here is definitely better. The sun will be colored later with a darker, warmer yellow, which will create a stronger contrast as a result. Now I'm using my small water tank brush again to work on the last little areas. Okay, I already like the background this way. Now I peel off the washi tape. Then I let this dry thoroughly, and after that I continue with colored pencils. Good, the page has dried, and I'm happy with the background. It's not too flashy, but vibrant enough so that when I outline the white objects with a white pen, they won't disappear into the background, but will still remain clearly visible. In the meantime, I finished this picture on the left. Now I'll start with the greenery, beginning with the fir branches. I'm using my Castle Art Soft Touch colored pencils, which I pretty much always use. I make the individual fir needles darker where they attach to the branch and lighter towards the tip. Compared to the green I use for the flowers and grass, this is a bit darker and also slightly cooler, with a bluish tint, but not as strong as on the other side, with a small motif. I continue on the same way with the other branches. Next, I'll move on to the blades of grass. I'll start with the second color I used for the fir branches, the second darkest color. As for the ground where's no snow, I'll see later whether I apply a second layer with olive deep to darken it a bit, or if I just darken it with colored pencils. Currently, there's still not much visible difference, but that can easily be changed. Now I'm using the combination of the very dark green again for this flower, the winter aconite, but I'm also adding leaf green as the lightest color. Okay, moving on to the snowdrops. Conventionally, the shadow areas are already somewhat indicated here, so I'll simply follow those. I continue piece by piece with the other leaves and stems in the same way. Next, I'll add these green stripes on the flowers. And here too, I'll try to create some light and shadow, making certain areas darker and others a bit lighter. Then I'll continue with dark brown, starting with a dark stripe on the bee or bumblebee and adding some shading at the bottom of the pine cone. I'm now using this lighter brown for the scarf as well as for her hair. As the final color in the brown combination, I'll use terracotta to fill in the shading, the hair of the other girl and the lighter parts on the pine cone. The elf's hair will also be brown. I've looked at some pictures of a bluetit and noticed that a bluetit looks a bit different, and so does a grey tit. That's why I'm creating a mix here of a bluetit and a grey tit, adding a bit of black. Next, I'm continuing with the yellow objects, specifically the tit, these blossoms and the bee, which is slightly more of a bumblebee, considering how fluffy it is. Now I'm coloring this hair the same way as the flower, and the upper part, which looks like a blossom, is somehow also part of her hair. The leaves here are partially the hair tie, and the flower is a kind of updo or bun. Then I can color the sun as well. And here too I'm using the darkest color for the areas that are the darkest due to the dot shading. This way the sun stands out nicely against the yellowish background. Even though there's still some snow here, at least a little bit, I think it's already a spring page. Have you started coloring spring pages yet? Or are you still working on winter pages? Because spring officially begins on March 20th. I've actually already seen the first snowdrops. Not yet with open blossoms, but they're already there. However, they are currently covered with snow again. This year, we've really have a lot of snow, and usually it doesn't stay for so long. But this year, we've had snow lying around for weeks already. And that's very unusual for the part of Germany where I live. It really doesn't happen that often. Normally, the snow melts right away, or at the latest after a few days. Now, a few days later, as I'm editing the video, the snow has completely melted and you can sit in the sun at 15 degrees Celsius. But back to the video. Now I'm coloring the stripes of the head here in the same yellow combination. Alright, I continue with the skin tone. First, I'm using cadmium orange light on these faces that have become a bit darker. And then using tangerine and Naples yellow. For the lighter skin tones, I'm using terracotta as the shadow color. I find shading on such tiny faces almost even harder than on larger ones, which is why I'm not adding too much shadows. Now I'm using coral for the lips and the red cheeks. After all, it's cold outside, so the cheeks quickly turn a bit pink. Alright, that was the skin. Now I'll continue with the red. The tongue of the sun, the ladybird's wings, and the stripes on this head. I'm briefly coloring the body of the ladybird in brown. Then I continue with the pink tones. The outfit of this girl, the stripes on this head, the earthworm, and her outfit's top. Now I'm using tangerine again to go over the worm a bit, where it's too pink. And there are some small gaps in the background. I try to fill that in a bit more. Then it's already time to continue with blue, but not for the snow, rather for the remaining blue elements. As I mentioned earlier, I colored the bird a bit incorrectly, but for someone not very familiar with birds, it won't be noticeable. I'm simply following the given shading here, since I can't get it look realistically accurate in terms of color anymore. The skirt is still missing, although it almost looks like it's a cape, and this part here is a dress. Is the outfit inspired by the ladybird? I also wanted to color this beetle blue. Now I'm going over the light blue again with a white pencil from the Castle Arts Harmonious set, the Comfort White, to blend everything together. Then I'll use brown again for the bird and the shoe. And I also color the eyes of the beetle brown, adding white highlights afterwards. Now only the snow and the snowdrops are left, and I'll start with the snow. For that I'm using the color Forget Me Not from the Harmonious set. I'm starting down here and coloring all the shaded areas with this color. Next, I'll use Camelus to blend the blue a bit with the white of the snow. I'm trying not to get too close to the outlines in the lower section, so that a small white area remains visible. I do the same for the rest of the snow. In winter, I used pencils from the Harmonious set for almost every picture. I'm curious if that's because of all the gray and generally light shades, which are great for snow and fit perfectly into a winter color palette. Or if I continue using this set as often in spring. Since I want to make these lines white later, I'm coloring the area behind it completely in blue. Here as well, since I want to make this snow hill white, meaning the line, I'll darken the area behind it so that you can clearly see in the end that there's a small hill and not just a flat surface. Now I'm extending this line a bit further on the wing and will do the same up here, since the wings are supposed to be transparent. I'll use a shimmering watercolor for this, but overall the wings should remain mostly transparent. I completely forgot about this face here. I need to catch up on that right away. Or should I make it white as well? No, I think I'll use a bit of skin tone for it. Where the snow is dripping down, I'm adding some shadows so that when I make the lines white at the end, it will still be visible. I'll outline these drops with light blue again to ensure the white line stands out clearly, making it evident that these are drops. For the face, I'm now using tangerine for the shadow color. Since this scene depicts melting snow, I would say this figure represents the snow that's melting. That's why the person will have slightly lighter skin tones. I now use wheatgrass from the Harmonious set as well. Okay, now only the snowdrops and the corresponding outfit are missing. As I mentioned before, I would like this side to be a bit warmer than the other. Therefore, I'm using pumice and camphor white from the Harmonious set. And to add a slight touch of color, I use wheatgrass. I start with the petals using pumice. Now I'll use camphor white to color the rest of the leaf, leaving some areas white, since camphor white isn't a pure white. Okay, those were the blossoms. Now I'll continue with the outfit. For the wings, I simply add a few shadows with the darkest color, which are already sketched in. Then I continue with the other petals and the inside of the flower. Where these arches curve downwards, it looks like a fold to me, so I'll add some gray here for a shadow. Where the leaves overlap, I'll use a bit more gray. Now only the shoe is missing. I'll also go over the shadow areas here with this very light pink shade to add some warmth compared to the cold snow. Now only the details are missing, although I wanted to touch up the green here. I'm using cadmium green pale once more to darken this area a bit at the bottom, so you can see that the snow casts a small shadow, as does the earthworm. Since the sun is coming from over there, I'll apply it only in that direction. I continue here up to this point and then further over there. Now I'm using my gel pen set from Avec, using the glitter silver for these small snowflakes in the background. Next I'll use glitter pink for the dots on the cape. Now I'm using the Sakura Jelly Roll for the highlights in the eyes. I'll also color the bumblebee's eyes brown and add white dots. Finally, I'll use my white Posca marker for the snowflakes, the snow, the flowers and the outfit. So, now that I've outlined everything, I'm using a bit of metallic watercolor for the wings to give them a slightly shimmer. I'm using a separate brush for this paint because some of the metallic particles always seem to stick to the brush. That's why I usually use the same brush for it, as otherwise you quickly get glitter where you don't want it, even if you've washed the brush so roughly beforehand. Since the paint isn't opaque, the background still shines through beautifully. By the way, I've used up 7 felt tip pens on this page and was able to sort them out. If I continue using them up this well, I can buy some new good water-based markers. But first, I want to finish using the ones I already have. So, I would say the page is finished now. I still have a bit of shimmer left on the brush, so I'll add a little shimmer to this beetle. And with that, the page is truly done. Here you can clearly see the glitter from the gel pens and the shimmer. I hope the video was entertaining for you. Bye and see you next time.